Hi there, and welcome to the Alberta Update, a first-hand look at what's happening in your province with your government. I am your host, Bruce McAllister. Thank you for being with us today. Well, the Minister of Education is going to join us. There is a massive and historic school build underway in Alberta. We'll talk to him about that. The Minister of Mental Health and Addiction will be here to talk about new efforts to help those struggling with addictions. But first, we're going to welcome in the Premier to say good day and chat about all the things. Premier, thanks for popping by. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Bruce.
Hey, we're off and running with another session of the Alberta Legislature. I know the budget isn't released until Thursday. However, there was a scoop, I think, because reporter Rick Bell was reporting on a possible tax cut for Albertans that might be coming. Can you speak to that and maybe what we might see Thursday?
Well, as you know, I can't confirm anything until the budget does come down, but we have heard from Albertans that they're hurting, and we need to address issues of affordability, especially with the threat of tariffs hanging over us. If there is a 25% tariff that comes in, even if it is less for our energy products, we still have a large number of agriculture producers, manufacturers, those who are in the timber and lumber industry that are going to be heavily impacted. And we want to make sure that individuals have more dollars in their pockets to be able to deal with what might happen on an increase in prices. So the finance minister will reveal more on Thursday, but we were very mindful that people have been asking for an acceleration of the tax cut that we promised during the last election, and you'll see on Thursday how it is that the finance minister intends to deliver on that.
All right. Well, we'll chat more about it next week. But as you and I both know, the dinger, Rick Bell, rarely gets it wrong. So be interesting to see what he has to report on. Hey, there's so much legislation coming that we could talk about, but I want to talk about one that I know is near and dear to your heart. And you did a press conference earlier this week with Minister Dan Williams talking about the Compassionate Care Act. Tell us more, Premier, about this legislation.
Well, I think people know that we have seen an acceleration in the number of opioid deaths, especially during COVID. We're finally seeing them come down on the other side. And there's really two ways that you address that crisis. One is through policing, and that's part of the reason why we're adding more sheriffs to the streets. We're having special interdiction teams at the border with sniffer dogs and drones to make sure that we can catch any of this illegal product or its precursors coming into the country or going out of the country. I think that's important, not only for us, but also to preserve our relationship of trust with the United States. But you can't just focus on the law enforcement side. You also have to focus on the people who are the victims. And those are the individuals who get addicted to this deadly, deadly drug. And so what we've discovered is that there are some people who can make the choice to go into a recovery pathway on their own, but there are many, many people who have not been able to. I think in the press conference, Dan told a story of somebody who overdosed 186 times last year. And that's just not compassionate for a community to sit around and watch people slowly killing themselves and harming others and not being able to get their free agency and their lives back. So compassionate intervention is going to intervene, create a process to intervene to order those people into care so they can get the treatment that they need, get clear-minded, have their brains heal from their addiction, and hopefully set them up for a lifetime of success in sobriety. So that will be coming, the framework for that later in the spring. And we will also be constructing special purpose-built facilities that will be ready in 2029, but we're working on how we'll be able to identify beds in the interim in Northern Alberta and Southern Alberta so we can get started on that right away.
Such important work. Premier, you'll be happy to know Minister Williams is joining us on the program in a couple of minutes. We'll flesh this out a little bit more for people. So much more legislation we could talk about. We'll do it in the weeks ahead, but I want to pivot a bit to the situation with the U.S. President Trump's administration has said tariffs are coming. I guess it's any day now. It changes somewhat depending on what press conference he gives, but we do know that they're coming. Is there any way to say what kind of an impact they're going to have, and how are we preparing?
It's really difficult because it seems to me that there are three different tariff regimes that have been put on the table. One was the 25% tariffs that he initially threatened to bring into effect on February 4th that we got a reprieve on. And those are connected to showing that we're serious about matching their effort on dealing with this deadly crisis of fentanyl trafficking and the cartels. And I think the initial steps that the federal government took were not sufficient. And so seeing that there's now an appointed fentanyl czar, an additional $200 million invested towards border security, as well as declaring these cartels to be terrorist organizations. I think that matches the kind of expectation that the U.S. president has. That being said, we may end up still seeing those tariffs come in on March the 4th, and everybody is watching to see. The second types of tariffs are the steel and aluminum. The steel and aluminum are essential products if you're going to have a strong economy, a strong manufacturing base, and be able to have the backbone for your defense industry. And that's part of the reason why I think the Americans are very concerned about some of that being hollowed out. So we're going to have to make sure that we find new markets for our product. Maybe we should be buying more from each other to be able to support our own steel and aluminum industry. So that's the ones that are supposed to come in March the 12th. And then the third type of tariff, it just goes to all the niggly little trade irritants that America has with Canada, whether it's our 5% GST, which the president, he looks at these value-added taxes as akin to a tariff. They're irritated by the digital services tax. They don't think it's fair that Canada and other countries are taxing some of their big tech companies. They're irritated by supply management. And also the president has talked about wanting to get more of the auto industry to return to the United States. So those are going to be a longer term discussion, I think, probably through a renegotiated Canada-US free trade agreement. But we need to get to an election first, because we need to have somebody who's sitting at the table saying, you know what, you're stuck with me. I got a 4-year mandate. Let's deal and let's get some of these resolved. By not having that stability at the federal level, I think it's really harming our ability to get to some kind of agreement to resolve those trade irritants.
Well, you led me right into my last question, and Premier was going to be to address that. It looks like the Liberals are getting closer to electing a leader. They're certainly getting rid of candidates fast. That said, it really is what we need, is it not? Somebody with a 4-year mandate to go to the United States and deal with President Trump and his administration.
Yeah, I've been saying that for some time. When it looked like the current prime minister was in trouble in December, said, you know what, if he thinks he can get a new mandate, then go for it. Let's get an election. Let's get a 4-year mandate for someone, so that we have somebody to sit at the bargaining table with the president who does have a strong 4-year mandate, as well as having the support of his Congress to be able to get things through. So I think it's more important than ever. Now, it looks to me like we've got Justin Trudeau will be done in somewhere around 12 days. The new leader is going to be chosen by the Liberal Party on March the 9th. I'm very hopeful that they will go into an immediate election. Let's get this issue resolved, whether it's the current government that is able to continue on, or whether it's going to be a new government that comes in. We need to make sure that we've got somebody who sits at the table with a strong 4-year mandate one way or the other. And the sooner that gets resolved, the sooner we can get on to having some really constructive conversations with our American counterparts, and hopefully resolving these trade issues, so that we continue to maintain a virtual 99% tariff-free relationship with the United States. That's what we should be aiming for. No tariffs on anything going one way or the other, because we mutually benefit from this integrated economy that we have.
Hear, hear. Premier, thanks for this. We'll do it again next week, and appreciate the time.
You bet. Thanks, Bruce.
All right, there is our Premier, Danielle Smith, on the Alberta update. Well, Alberta, as the Premier alluded to, is an international leader when it comes to treatment and recovery, and that is driven largely by what is known as the Alberta model, the Alberta recovery model. Alberta's government has prioritized investment into treatment capacity and taking it to the next level, and taking the next steps in ensuring that Albertans have access to the care and the treatment that they need to overcome addiction. As we just mentioned, the Premier and Minister Williams made a significant announcement earlier this week. It was the compassionate care announcement. They'll be debating the bill in the legislature. At the press conference were several people who know all too well the impact that addiction can have on the family. Here is Amy Schiffner. She is a mother of a young man who's suffering from addiction. She feels very hopeful that these new measures may finally provide an avenue for her child to get the treatment that he needs.
A memory that haunts me every single day. My heart shattered as my son stepped away from the sanctuary of our harm, choosing the grip of drugs over the stability of our home, family, school, and a future. Each night, the silence of his absence pressing down on us as we lay awake, overwhelmed by worry and fear of where he might be and whether he was safe. I found myself making the unbearable call that no parent ever wishes to make. I reported my son missing. The days turned into desperate searches of downtown Calgary, combed through homeless shelters, and chasing down any lead. For agonizing weeks, our lives were engulfed in a suffocating uncertainty, the dread of not knowing if he was even alive. When EMS responded to a young male overdosing on a train is when I finally found him. I picked him up from the hospital and jumped into action again, desperately seeking programs, both familiar and unexplored, grabbing at anything to help him. And yet we found ourselves trapped in a relentless cycle of setback, each more devastating than the last. He has attended numerous detox centers and residential treatment. It is essential to understand that those suffering from severe addiction may not be able to choose treatment rationally. The notion of choice is almost non-existing, as everything important pales in comparison.
Such an impactful clip. That press conference was something else. There's the man that's responsible for all of this, the minister joining us, Dan Williams. Minister, that was, as I said, a very impactful day. The compassionate care legislation. Tell us how compassionate care intervention works.
So what I announced recently, and the clip you saw from the press conference, was an $180 million investment in 2 compassionate intervention facilities, one for Northern Alberta, one for Southern Alberta. And if passed in budget 2025, we're going to start work on it right away. Compassionate intervention, Bruce, is the idea that when there are overdoses and addiction that's public and on display in Alberta, it's not at all caring, it's not Canadian, it's not compassionate to just leave our family members and friends to suffer addiction, continuously facilitating it, as we see in Vancouver with the BC NDP policies they have there and across this country. Alberta's taken a stand that says no to facilitating addiction. Healthcare should be healing and not harmful. That's a bold statement to make today in the addiction space in Canadian politics. It shouldn't be. And compassion intervention is an extension of that. It says, for those who are in the worst articulation of addiction, the ones who are completely captured, when they're a harm to themselves or others because of their drug use or addiction, then we have a responsibility to intervene if they're likely to cause harm to themselves or the community. And so these facilities will play a part in that. The legislation I'm hoping and planning to introduce very soon that follows enables the legal mechanism for us to say, for example, this 186-time overdoser. We've had one individual in the province overdose 186 times, bare minimum, last year, because not every overdose is recorded by the provincial health authority. And so we know this individual is one breath away from death every time they overdose. It is horrific to think of the hardship that that individual, the offense to their dignity, and the potential of a family member caring for that individual. They need to have serious supports. I don't want that 187th time of overdose to be the last time that they get a chance to live, for that to end their life. So
the minister's just an unbelievable example. Listen, I can't fathom it, but anybody walking around the streets of our cities has seen an increase in the use of drugs. I know you have led the way in trying to put a stop to this, and Minister Mike Ellis and resourcing our police departments and trying to deal with it. How do you balance, I guess, individual rights and freedoms with this act? I mean, the case you're describing makes perfect sense. You've got to do something about that. But there will be a balance for us and for law enforcement agencies as well.
yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm a conservative and I believe in civil liberties. It's a part of who I am and my political and personal DNA. So I want to make sure that we get this right. But if you walk down the streets right now in downtown Edmonton or Calgary and Jasper Avenue, or you take a C train line in Calgary, or heck, even in my communities, Peace River or other secondary communities across the province, there's no way anyone can say that we've got the balance right now. There's a public addiction crisis, and you have a right not to inhale secondhand crystal meth smoke. You have a right to be safe if somebody's speedballing meth and fentanyl as they're either unconscious, unfortunately, or perhaps acting erratic and violently as you're trying to get into the rec center with your family. That is deeply, deeply inappropriate, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we provide safe public spaces for families and Albertans to live in. And so this is not a new problem. There's legislation for PCHAD, Protecting Children Abusing Drugs Act, and that has been in Alberta for decades. We have some experience there in terms of how to make sure we balance this. We have the Mental Health Act in Alberta and across every other province in this country that allows mandatory treatment if it's a diagnosed mental illness where you're likely to cause harm to yourself or others. So this is paralleling some of that structure to make sure we balance civil liberties and also protect the community and the dignity of those who are suffering from addiction. And so there'll be a commission with a member at large, a public, there'll be a legal expert and a medical expert with multiple touch points to be able to make sure that we are going through the right steps. And of course, all of it will be subject to judicial review.
Okay, and 2 compassionate intervention centers are being built. It's going to take them time to build those, and
Yes.
you know that. So what do you do in the interim? Do you have steps that you're taking to help those individuals in the interim?
Right. So we're continuing to build out the continuum of care. We've added close to 20,000 treatment spaces since we got into government in 2019. That's an over 50% boost in our treatment capacity that we've seen, whether it be detox or long-term treatment. 11 recovery communities partnering with Indigenous communities in the process, the entire way along, making sure that we're meeting people where they're at, getting them into recovery. But that's not even the end of it. When it comes to compassionate intervention, I'm working to identify beds in Edmonton and Calgary that can be used with this legislation before we complete the facilities. With existing beds in our facilities that we have, we know that we can make some of this work for the most dramatic and most direly affected and addicted community members. And so we're not going to wait until these facilities are completed. We're going to start implementing this policy in the meantime.
It's become known as the Alberta recovery model. There's another philosophy out there shared by another governing party and others, and they talk about harm reduction approaches. They talk about safe supply and supervised consumption sites. Your thoughts on that approach and why you're taking Alberta down a different path?
My thoughts are that approach has failed. It started off with good intentions. It started off as harm reduction. When you talk about unsafe supply, government-supplied heroin, when you talk about drug injection sites and consumption sites on every street corner, and the only solution is to do more of it all the time, causing public chaos and indignity to everybody suffering from addiction, it stops being about harm reduction and becomes harm production itself. And that's what the federal Liberal government and the NDP have done in British Columbia, Vancouver, for example. They themselves are the source, the genesis of the harm. They're not reducing any of it, they're producing it. And I think that is just absolutely unconscionable for a government responsible to care for the most vulnerable, as ours is, to see our neighboring governments, instead of caring for the most vulnerable, facilitating their very slow, tragic death. It just seems like such a treasonous thing to do in a really moral sense, with the responsibility and the resources and the power that you've been given, elected by Canadians and British Columbians. It's deeply wrong. And so our government won't do that.
Well, it takes courage to do the right thing, and you're certainly walking in the right direction. I know a lot of other provinces are starting to follow your lead. Minister Dan Williams, we appreciate your time. Thanks for your work.
Thanks, Bruce. Chat with you soon.
You bet. Well, a major boost for Alberta's aerospace industry as a global aviation giant is making a major investment. Lufthansa Technik Canada is setting up a cutting-edge maintenance and repair facility at Calgary International Airport, specializing in next-generation LEAP engines. Now, with only 5 certified operators worldwide, Calgary is now on the aviation map in a big way. WestJet is already on board, the airline just signing a massive 15-year, multi-billion-dollar deal to keep its fleet in top shape right here at home. The facility set to break ground in 2025 and be fully operational by 2027. A massive school construction project is underway in Alberta. We're going to welcome in Demetrios Nicolaides. He, of course, is the Education Minister in the province of Alberta. Good day, Minister.
Good day, Bruce. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, let's talk a bit about what's prompted the government to announce this. I think it was almost $9 billion, wasn't it, the total amount of the announcement? I guess I can answer my own question to a point, but unprecedented, really, what you've done here.
Yeah, you're right. It's been just shy of $9 billion, $8.6 billion that the Premier announced in September to add more spaces to our education system. So Of course, that means building new schools, modernizing existing schools, replacing ones that need replacement, adding more modulars, pulling out all the stops effectively so that we can achieve our goal, which is to add 200,000 spaces over the next 7 years. So it's a very aggressive, very historic program that will add a lot more student spaces in every corner of the province.
Hey, building schools takes time. I know I don't have to tell you that. So how do you address the enrollment pressures in the short term?
Yeah, you're right. When a project is ready for construction, it typically takes about 2 to 3 years for the project to be completed. So we do have pressures right now, and we do need to take steps immediately to help address the pressure. That's part of the reason why in the 8.6 billion, we are also expanding our modular or our prefab classroom program. So of course, prefabricated classrooms are built in a warehouse, built in a factory. They can be built very quickly and then put on the back of large trailers and brought to a school site. And they can connect on to the school site and add additional space very quickly. So we are making a larger investment into that program so we can dispatch more of those prefabricated classrooms in a much faster time. It's not a permanent solution, but it is an immediate solution. The permanent solution, of course, is building more schools, which we're also doing.
Makes sense. Listen, we need to staff those schools with teachers and support staff. Are we going to be able to do that? Will we have a pool big enough to fill those positions?
Yeah, absolutely. Funding is tied to enrollment. So whatever enrollment looks like in the province, we provide a level of funding to that level of enrollment. So as our population grows, as our student enrollment grows, the amount of funding that's being allocated to education will also increase in a corresponding way so that we can hire more teachers, educational assistants, and other staff. So we will absolutely be taking steps to ensure that they can be adequately staffed.
Minister, one of the things that your government did was provide capital funding for charters and independent schools. There was some pushback to that, but I think a lot of people in the province were glad that you did it. Tell us why that was so important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted to make sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity to build spaces. Of course, our public and Catholic school divisions are seeing a lot of pressure, but so too are our charter providers and independent providers. They're also seeing huge wait lists. I was recently at Edmonton Islamic School, which has a significant wait list, and other charter schools that provide custom programming. I know there's one in Calgary as an example, a charter school that provides unique programming for gifted students. All of these schools are seeing pressure, so we want to help expand spaces in those institutions as well. And especially so that parents who are looking and need more customized programming for their kids are able to get it.
And I suppose it ties into your belief, your government's belief in school choice.
Yeah, absolutely. School choice is an essential pillar for us to advance. We fundamentally believe that parents, not politicians, know what's best for their kids and know what their kids need in terms of their education. I believe it's our responsibility to make sure those choices are available, and then parents can make an informed decision about what the best choice is for their child.
All right, listen, one more. It's been 5 or 6 months, maybe 5 months now since you announced your initiative to build more schools. How many projects have you moved forward in that time? I mean, can you give us an indication as to how fast this process works?
Yeah, we've been able to move 22 projects forward, and that's one of the interesting pieces about the new program. We have 3 stages that a school project must go through: planning, design, and then construction. In the past, a project could only move from one stage to the other at budget time, so once a year. So there was this once a year window for a project to move forward. Now, however, those projects are able to move forward whenever they're ready. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Northeast Calgary to announce that 11 projects that were in the design phase have completed the required work and are ready to begin construction. So they're able to get a several-month head start on construction than would have typically been the case if we waited until budget.
Well, so many communities are grateful with the growth pressures they're experiencing for sure. Minister, listen, thank you. We appreciate your time, your efforts on this file as well. There is Education Minister Demetrios Nicolaides on the Alberta Update. Well, Alberta's government is investing $55 million to help businesses develop technologies that create jobs, lower costs, and reduce emissions. This funding will help 15 projects develop cutting-edge technologies that could one day be used to access and provide services across Canada and the world. The funding will support projects to reduce energy costs and lower emissions across the economy, including in the energy, in the water treatment, dairy, and forestry sectors.
Alberta is a global leader, thanks to our industry, in developing new technologies to reduce emissions, while of course providing the safe, affordable, and reliable energy to Canada and the world for decades to come. Our resources, our people, and our entrepreneurial spirit are second to none.
It is estimated that these projects will reduce emissions by 119,000 tons each year and create almost 1,600 jobs and inject $237 million into Alberta's GDP by 2027. Well, this month, Alberta rolled out its new tax on electric vehicles. Those with electric vehicles will now be charged $200 when they register their vehicles and when they renew their registration each year. The province saying this aligns with what gas-powered car owners typically pay in fuel taxes. Alberta's government saying this is a fair way to ensure that all drivers are contributing to the maintenance and upkeep of roads and highways throughout Alberta. As part of ongoing efforts to help Albertans save more on their electricity bills, Alberta's government is encouraging residents to explore their electricity options and ensure they know they don't have to settle for the rate of last resort. And you may have heard that in the news headlines, the rate of last resort. There are three options when you purchase electricity: the rate of last resort, a competitive contract for a variable rate, or a competitive contract for a fixed rate. And Nathan Neudorf, the Minister of Affordability and Utilities, saying there is a new process in place to notify customers.
The new rate confirmation requirement means that every 90 days, the Utilities Consumer Advocate will contact all customers who are still on the rate of last resort to confirm if they'd like to remain on the default rate and encourage them to explore other options that they have available to them.
Last year, tens of thousands of Albertans households made the switch from the rate of last resort to a competitive contract, saving them hundreds of dollars in charges. And that does it for this episode of the Alberta Update, a first-hand look at what's happening in your province and what your government is up to as they resume sitting in the Alberta legislature. A reminder, you can find us on YouTube. You can also now find us on Rumble and all of the social media sites as well. And a reminder, we'll be back here every week that the legislature is sitting. So that does it for this week, and we will see you again next time. Thanks for watching.